Hello, and welcome to our program for this evening, bringing World War II history to life with authors Brotherton and Lee. This program is being presented as part of our summer reading program. I'm Becky, and I'm a librarian with Tampa Hillsborough County Public Library. I'm joined today by our guest speakers, Marcus Brotherton and Tosca Lee. They are co-authors of a recently released book that we're going to be discussing here tonight. And before we get started, I do want to thank our summer reading community partners. If you haven't signed up for summer reading yet, there's still time. There's prizes and participation for our reading challenges. You can win Kindle Fires, Nintendo Switches, and even tickets to Zoo Tampa. And summer reading is not just for kids, it's also for teens and adults. And adults just have to read 4 books the entire summer to be able to complete their summer reading challenge. So we are going to turn things over now to our great authors, Marcus and Tosca.
Yay! Thank you so much. Thanks for having us. Well, Marcus, since this book was your idea, I think you get to start.
Well, let me go back all the way to the beginning. I was born at a very young age. My mother and I were very close. You know, it all started, Tosca. It was back in, I want to say 06 or 07. I am doing a lot of interviews with World War II veterans, and I had done a book with a man named Lieutenant Buck Compton. Was one of the original Band of Brothers, if you ever saw that miniseries on HBO. And so after Buck's book came out, he was in his late 80s by then, but he was still very active around the country. He still had a really robust speaking schedule. And his daughter, Tracy, phoned me up one day, and we had become close during the process of doing Buck's book. And she said, my dad could kind of use a traveling companion. How would you like to travel with my dad? Is he sort of helping him navigate airports and whatnot? And I jumped at the chance. It was just a great opportunity. So one day, Lieutenant Compton and I were sitting in an airport lounge, and you got to think that this is just this burly, elite paratrooper. He has seen blood and guts and thunder, and very, very tough, strong man. And he was telling me about the events of Bastogne, this incredibly horrific winter battle that he had fought, he and his companions, and they were outgunned, outmanned, huddled in foxholes, getting shot at. Some of the men didn't have proper winter clothing. They had wrapped their feet in burlap bags. And I said something like, wow, it just must have been so difficult for you being in Bastogne. And this is the crux of this big, long story. Lieutenant Compton looks at me and he goes, yeah, it was hard being in Bastogne, but at least we weren't in the Pacific. He said, man, those guys really have it tough. And that's what began this journey. It was Lieutenant Compton's statement that the guys in the Pacific had it worse than the guys in Bastogne. And so what did that mean? I had to find out. And that's what started the journey of this book.
And so I knew Marcus. We met, I want to say, closer to 2013, maybe, for the first time. It was somewhere around there. And Marcus had written a novel called Feast for Thieves and had reached out, and I ended up endorsing that novel, and it won a Christie Award, and it's a great book. And so I knew Marcus from that. But a few years later, in 2017, Marcus emailed me and said, hey, can we jump on the phone? And when we got on the phone together, and he told me about this book that he had started, about a novel about World War II in the Pacific and what had been going on there, and the Bataan Death March, which I actually was not familiar with. And so that was about 2017. And he invited me to write this book with him. And I knew Marcus's reputation really well. He's got, he's very well known for his World War II nonfiction, very well known for his biographies, and I knew his novel writing. And so that was kind of a no-brainer. And so I came on in 2017. But Marcus, do you want to talk a little bit about actually it was a few years. It was like 7 years. up to that point, just on the back burner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, how's that for an empathetic response? It's like if someone calls you up and says, how would you like to write a book with me about the Bataan Death March? I mean, how often does that happen in your life, right?
Actually, I was kind of like, the what? Because
What? The
honestly,
what?
I was not familiar with that chapter of history. And so Marcus briefly filled me in on the phone. And that's when I said, yeah, this sounds like a really big story. And I had a lot of homework to do at that point.
After my initial conversation with Lieutenant Compton back in the airport, I had started this manuscript, and it was unfunded at the start. It was kind of a back burner passion project. I was just really in this mode of discovery. What was this battle in the Pacific all about? And I had worked on this manuscript on and off for about 7 years. I had completed one draft of the manuscript. I had sent it out to early readers, which is something I always do just to get their feedback. And the response at the time that I was getting was, it was good. It was kind of a B+ manuscript, but it wasn't great at the time. And I wanted to take it to that next level. I figured, the guys who are really there, the guys who fought and died for our freedom, they deserve this. So I talked to my agent. He said, yeah, you've been working on this thing for too long. You're probably too close to the canvas. Why don't you get a collaborator, and he or she can just help you see the forest through the trees. So along the way, I had read a number of Tosca's books, and I knew her just to be an excellent writer, very intelligent. She did just impeccable research, and she wrote in a layered style, which I really love, where there's sort of one thing being said, and then there's a subtext of another thing being said. And so I call up Tosca, and that led to that second conversation where I just said, hey, Tosca, how would you like to write a book with me about the Bataan Death March? And I turned it over to her. She worked on it for a number of years, and then the very last year we both worked on it, just sort of helping to get the voice all consistent into one flow. That's how this book came to be.
Yeah, and so what a lot of people don't know is, this sounds like a lot of time, but Marcus was writing a lot of books in those 7 years. And then when he contacted me, I still had 2 books left on my Simon & Schuster contract, which turned into my pandemic duology, The Line Between and A Single Light. So I was finishing those, marketing those. And then a real pandemic happened, and I just kind of creatively went dead for a while and was unable to really accomplish much of anything. We were all my kids were home from school. Our house was torn up for renovations, not torn up because the kids were home from school, but the house was torn up previously to them coming home from school because we were renovating. And here we were caught in a stasis, and I kind of shut down for the better part of that year. So I probably added more time to the process than I intended to. But Marcus did a really extraordinary thing when we decided to collaborate on this, and that is the fact that he basically handed over his work, his research, everything, and was like, dig in. And I think that that's really tremendous, and it shows. We get asked all the time, how do co-writers write something together? Because understandably, there's so much personal investment and usually ego involved, and you probably won't ever hear a story like that again, where one author basically says, here's my baby, see what you want to, go in there and check out and do. And so actually, Marcus has a really cool story to tell about where you got that idea for that.
I had just read a biography of Jacqueline Onassis Kennedy Onassis. During the years when she was an editor in New York, and she was working with an author at the time, and she sent him the manuscript back, and she said, here's what you need to do, and then she said, just be as free as you can. Mm-hmm. I thought that was just a fabulous statement from Jackie, and so when I turned over the manuscript to Tosca, that's what I said, just be as free as you can. And really, it was there was a lot of good sentiment behind that, in the sense that I knew if I was kind of hovering over her shoulder, micromanaging her, that would not free her to do the best work she could do. And I wanted her to bring her A game. I wanted her just to bring her all to this manuscript and make it as much her book as mine, which she did. And so that really led to a great jumping off place with Tosca there.
Mm-hmm. I really appreciate that too, because when I teach writing, and I do teach it quite a bit, my number one rule of writing is always to write as though no one will ever read it, which is a little bit hard to do when you know the book is probably going to be published, or you've got a co-author and you know somebody's probably going to read it right away. But that was just fabulous, and I think I should talk a little bit about what the story is. Why don't I
Tell the
share the
story.
story about the story? Yeah. So the Long March Home is the story of three best friends, a main character named Jimmy Propfield, and his two best friends, Hank and Billy. And their fourth best friend is Claire. Claire is Billy's older sister. And so this is the story of this group of young people growing up in Mobile, Alabama in the late 20s and 30s. And the book actually begins in 1941 when the three friends have enlisted in the Army and gone off to the Philippines, which was really considered a plum assignment. It was paradise. It was more desirable to many of the enlisted men than Hawaii even. And so they're in the Philippines and life seems really great until the events of December 7th when Pearl Harbor is bombed. And within 10 hours, the Philippines is plunged into war. And so here we are with these three young people. And I call them boys because they're the same age as my 18-year-old twins who just graduated from high school. So this whole thing is really unfathomable to me. But here they are. These three friends are plunged into war, fighting a war of terrible logistics where they're outmanned, outgunned, outprovisioned, hungry, sick, everything. And the Allied surrender happens the following year on April 9th, and they become POWs. And for them, it's just the beginning because those POWs are marched 60 miles in 6 days up through from the Bataan Peninsula to the POW camp. And if you stop along the way, you get you try to help somebody who fell down. You try to gather something to eat. Relieve yourself, whatever it is that you get bayoneted or you shot or beheaded. And so thousands of men died on that march. And it was an extremely brutal chapter in World War II history over those 6 days. And for those who had survived the war and for those who survived the death march, it's only the beginning of almost 4 years of captive life as a POW. And so this is the story of those best friends. And one thing that we did that I think was a really good call on our parts, I'm just going to pat us on the back, Marcus, is we have a dual timeline. And so every fourth chapter or so we go back in time to the 1930s and we back up and we see these young people as younger people doing the things that kids do, the stupid things that kids do, the fun things, growing up, coming of age, falling in love, and all those things. And that's the storyline that helps sustain us through the difficult parts of what was inspired by true accounts and real history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the cool thing, and while you're patting us on the back, I'll pat us on the back. Well,
Yay!
It's in the book world. There are trade reviews that come out right when the book is released, and Publishers Weekly, Library Journal, Book List, publications such as those, and they can do any number of things with a manuscript when it comes to reviewing it. They can ignore it completely. They can give your manuscript a scathingly horrible review, which occasionally happens in this industry. They can like it, and then if they absolutely love it, if it's really a rare, well-done manuscript it's just sort of above everything, they'll give it a star review. And just star reviews are extremely difficult to receive. And this manuscript has received 3 distinct starred reviews from Publishers Weekly, Book List, and Library Journal. So the extra time that we took, those 12 years, it paid off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it was also just named to the top 10 of Book List's top 10 historical fiction novels of the year. So, and you know, there was a time when we were working on this, especially, you know, for me, it was during the pandemic and all of that, where we didn't know what publisher, if any, this manuscript would end up at. We didn't know how it would be received. So we just continued to work and edit. And so to have that reception happen when it released has been really very gratifying for us.
Yeah, it's a good word, not to give up on your dreams. Tosca, let's talk about this. The themes of the book. If someone were to say to you, you know, it's art is kind of like people can take different things from it. So I don't want to be sort of like too sharp on the themes because people may see something that we don't. But I'm curious, you know, if you were to describe the themes of this book, how would you describe those?
I would describe it as a very redemptive story. I would describe it as a story of love and hope and brotherhood and sacrifice. And to me, that's what this story has always been. And it's always been a progression from, it's always been a progression into growing up and dealing with moving away from the simple black and white of childhood into the gray areas of adulthood that become exacerbated then in the theater of war. So what did I miss, Marcus? How would you describe it?
It's a bold story. Yeah, it's got enough grit in it. I mean, it's true to life. We didn't really pull punches there, but it also lifts. And there are just huge moments where readers tell us that they stand up and cheer or break down and cry. And the powerful emotional experience comes through in writing. I just had a man write me. In fact, I think I sent you that email. And he had fought World War II,
Good one.
but on the other side of the war, and he had never known what had happened on the Pacific. And then he read this story, and he had friends, like classmates who had fought in the Pacific, and they came back. They never talked about things, but when he read this manuscript, he goes, "Okay, now I understand." And that was a tremendous email to get, and he was just really satisfied with his reading experience there.
I've received some emails like that too. I had one of my longtime readers write to me and say, "I'm just getting ready to start this book," after the newsletter announcement went out where I said, "Hey, it's out, go get it." And he wrote back about a week later and he said, "I finished." And like this other gentleman, he said, you know, he never spoke about what went on over there. And that's such a theme. I hear that from so many family members as I meet more and more family members of those who were in the Philippines. He never spoke, but what he said in his email to me was, now after reading this book, I think I may understand why. Because really there were truly heinous, truly horrible and difficult things that happened. And yet it's always been really important to Marcus and I to tell stories that don't leave you. It's important not to leave readers in despair. And our intention in writing these stories is to lift the human spirit and inspire.
And I think we do want to be clear too that it's not just for fans of World War II literature. I sent the book to a friend of mine who lives on the East Coast, and she's very well read, and she, I say this in the most nice way I can, but she's kind of cranky when it comes to books. She just doesn't like, sort of what everybody is reading or whatever's hot at the moment. So I sent her a copy of this book, and right away she dismissed it. Like, she sent me an email saying, "Oh, I never read World War II. I'm not going to read it. Besides, I'm far too busy with what I'm currently reading." And she gave the book to a friend who does love World War II, and so that was that. I thought, and then like a couple weeks later, she phoned me up, and she doesn't phone people up kind of willy nilly because she's not a phoner, but she phoned me up and she said, "Yeah, my friend who reads World War II, he had read it and he was raving so strongly about it that I had to read it. I had to find out what the big deal was." She said, I stayed home over Memorial Day weekend. I read the book straight through, and it's fantastic. You won me over. And I don't like books about World War II. So that was kind of cool to hear from her. And we had a good chuckle over that.
Yeah, yeah, that is cool. I have to say, this is not my normal, not my, this is not my, I mean, I've never written a World War II novel before. I've written very historical, as in 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. And I write thrillers that sometimes have a historical bent, and then some dystopian stuff and, pandemic stuff. But I've never done a World War II one before. So this was definitely new for me as well.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Tosca, people have asked us in other interviews what it's like to work together. And I think particularly that last year when we were really working closely together on the manuscript and sort of passing it back and forth. What would you say were some of the hallmarks of that year, and how did we get through that year with our sanity intact?
With a lot of laughter, for one. I like to say that the secret to a good partnership, whatever the situation, whether you're writing together, whether you're in business together, whatever it is to each know the strengths that you're bringing to the table. And so I think that was really important for us to recognize in one another, where they were strong and what we thought we were contributing to the friendship. We also had several conversations around scenes, or even smaller things like a paragraph or an end of a chapter, where we would say, this section here is really important to me, and this is a non-negotiable to me. And we didn't have a lot of those. There were, we compromised on so many things. We compromised in a good way, but there were a few where it was like, okay, this really means something, and we're going to let it be. And I think that was really important. Marcus and I are also big believers in the power of prayer, and we laugh a lot, and there's a lot to laugh at. When you're in the trenches writing a book, and then you're trying to sell it, and then you're doing all the edits again, and then you're, out doing the thing and marketing it. So I think humor is really an important part of that equation too.
Yeah, it was a good business marriage, to use that term, where some non-negotiables, a lot of flexibility, and hopefully a lot of fun. One of the fun things about even this relationship has been, we have only met in person once, and only once. We worked 12 years together and only met in person once, and that was last October. Yeah. Met at the publishers, and we both flew in for a marketing meeting, and we're staying at the same hotel. And that morning, in the lobby, I was standing there, and around the corner walked Tosca. And I went, I know you so well, and yet, nice to meet you.
Great. I know you from your picture.
Yeah, it was pretty funny.
Yeah. That was a good time. That's weird, when you've written with someone and you really do know them that well. I mean, not in a everyday sense, but in how their brain works, sense and stuff. And then you've never met. So that is a very surreal kind of moment. I think we all went out to eat with our team and stuff. And I even looked over and I was like, so what does he eat? Because I had no idea. The answer is salmon.
Yeah, I don't remember what I had that meal. That was a good one.
You had the fish.
Fish.
Yeah. So, what else can we tell you? There is, even though this novel is historical fiction, everything that happens to these young men in the story and in the story itself is inspired by true events that have really taken place. And there is one historical figure in particular who makes an appearance. And Marcus, do you want to talk about Philippa?
Yeah, Philippa Kalala was a real life female guerrilla leader in the Philippines during World War II. And we have several chapters in the book where the characters interact with her and get to know her. And it was amazing to come across this fact in history, that here was this woman who just ran around the countryside waging her war in these various clandestine ways. And she was leading men. She was leading both Filipino men and a few American men who had escaped the POW camps, and she was a force to be reckoned with. And so she makes a good, strong appearance in the book.
Mm-hmm. We get asked about her a lot too. She's an interesting character.
Yeah. Well, we're at the half an hour mark here. Maybe we should bring Becky back and have a Q&A time.
All right. Yeah, we have a few questions already, but if anybody wants to add their questions, go ahead. Our first question is, speaking of writing in a more modern historical setting, is it more difficult/stressful to write about events knowing that some people who experience the actual event could be a reader?
I think that's more stressful. I actually found that very intimidating.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, when you write about stuff 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, it's as equally important to me to get the details right. But when you have somebody who's potentially still alive, or the son or daughter of somebody who remembers something, then it's not just that you have to get it right, it's that there's specific emotions tied to those various historical details as well. So there's an extra layer of pressure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we definitely, getting it right is important. I've had the opportunity of interviewing a lot of real World War II veterans, and also from modern conflicts as well. But yeah, probably close to 4 dozen World War II veterans that I've interviewed. In fact, the last two I interviewed were 101 and 103.
Wow.
And just amazing opportunity to meet these men and tell their stories. So.
Yeah, and there's kind of a follow-up question to that. They said they met a number of veterans and have mixed responses to their willingness to talk about their experiences. How do you overcome some of their reluctance to just talk about it?
Absolutely. Yeah, the veterans who fought in World War II, particularly when they came home, there wasn't a huge encouragement for them to talk immediately after they came back. It was kind of happy days and getting on with the life, and the kind of the natural or the national conversation was, we've just won the war. Why would we want to sort of bring up all that bad stuff? Let's buy the new refrigerator. Let's buy the house. Let's get married and settle down and have kids and get on with our lives. And so there was a real reluctance for the men to talk, and there wasn't any encouragement for them to do so. As the years passed, the conversation changed radically, and probably in a very good way, to where if you've been through something traumatic like that, it's tough to keep that bottled up. And so there was a lot of good encouragement in the last 2 decades in particular, where the veterans were encouraged to talk. Do tell your story. And many of the veterans that I've spoken with, and their spouses as well, have just said, wow, that is so cathartic to finally get this out. So it's been great to see.
Great.
One of the greatest sources of the details that we were able to draw on in forming this narrative came from, the real life veterans, of course, but also the self-published accounts of the stories that the veterans themselves wrote. And I have just been astonished at the amount of vivid detail. You know, I can't remember what I ate for lunch yesterday, but the detail, of the smells in Manila and the bougainvillea and the big bay windows and the barracks in the old part of the city. And one of those actually was a guy who was assigned to the 31st Infantry, which is the same company that we put our 3 main characters in. And this guy's name was Joe Johnson, and he lied about his age, and he was enlisted at 14 and was a POW at the age of 15. And so when I say boys, there really were boys there. And actually Marcus worked with the family to make available Joe Johnson's story. And so if you're interested in this book and interested in a real life account of what happened over there, especially from the 31st Infantry perspective, I've got it over here. Well, Marcus, you probably have it handier. It's a bright and blinding. I can't reach it. A bright and blinding sun. It's right over on my credenza. So that's a really great resource if you really want to see a real life example of what happened.
It's a fascinating story and really shows the era back then and just some of the thoughts that were going on. Here was this young boy, his life at home wasn't super great. And so he had run away from his mother. He had moved in with his father in a different state. And his father, they hadn't gotten along very well either. And sort of in a fit of anger, the boy said to his dad, well, fine, maybe I'll just run away and join the army. And now this was a bluff, right? He's 14 years old. But as he goes to bed that night and starts thinking about it, he goes, you know, in the army, I'd be eating 3 times a day. And this was actually slightly before Pearl Harbor. So, you know, America wasn't in the thick of things yet. And so sure enough, that next morning he gets up and sort of steals downtown and finds this recruiter's office open in Pasadena and swears on a stack of Bibles that he's 18. And this is the day and age before, you know, record keeping or the internet, obviously. And the recruiter's like, you know, I don't believe you, but, you know, fill out this form and go sit over there. And the boy gets lost in the shuffle. And sure enough, you know, here he is, 14 years old. He ends up joining the military. And he's just thrust into this horrific battle. And his coming of age years are spent in so much conflict. But it points to this generation and some of the things that were happening then. And really, there wasn't a ton of difference between Joe at 15 when he actually did the fighting and some of the 18-year-olds and 17-year-olds who were in with parental permission. It really was a battle in many ways of teenagers, and that's what's so difficult to wrap our minds around.
It really is. Yeah, it's just, they're so young.
Mm-hmm.
Another question is, have you seen differences between veterans of different wars and their reactions to their service, and differences and similarities?
I did a book with Gary Bykirk a number of years ago, who had received a Medal of Honor for his actions in Vietnam. And certainly Vietnam, I think, you know, has this reputation of being not a black and white war. Whereas I think a lot of people look at World War II and say, well, look, you know, America was attacked in Pearl Harbor. You know, when you're attacked, you got to fight back, particularly in a national situation like this. And so World War II is seen as that more good and bad conflict. Gary, who fought in Vietnam, had a different side of things, where he had fought in a small remote village called Dak Sang, that the enemy had vowed to wipe off the face of the map. And so the people in this village, they weren't merely fighting to avoid communism, as it were, they were fighting to stay alive. And Gary, as a Green Beret, went in to, you know, to help these villagers. So his point was that there were sections of Vietnam, at least, that were far more black and white than we tend to think of, which was a fascinating perspective.
One other question is, what drew you to writing about World War II?
Yeah, it all went back to Lieutenant Buck Compton, and and that's actually a great question because, like, I grew up in Canada. I was born in British Columbia, and so I didn't sort of start this journey with a lot of American patriotism. By contrast, you know, I'm Canadian. So what am I doing writing about you know, America at war? And it was as simple as, well, I had moved to the United States. I had married an American. I was living down here, and I'd done a number of books already. And my agent knew the attorney for Lieutenant Buck Compton. And so my agent called me up one day and he said, hey, did you ever see Band of Brothers? I said, yeah, absolutely. I loved that miniseries. And he said, well, Lieutenant Compton lives in your area. He lives about 45 minutes from you, and he's interested in writing his memoirs. He needs a writing partner. Are you interested? You know, it's kind of one of those once in a lifetime opportunities that comes along. And I jumped at the chance. I said, yes, absolutely. Sign me up. And then I hung up the phone in a quieter moment. I'm kind of like, what have I done? Like, I know nothing about the American Mountain. So I started to get up to speed just very quickly. I read like 20 books cover to cover. And then Lieutenant Compton himself proved a very patient teacher. And the fascinating thing, I think, for me was along the way, what an appreciation I did develop for the work that the veterans, particularly of World War II, had done, and that generations removed from us today, many people did a whole lot so that we could live today in freedom. I mean, that's a staggering concept once I had gotten my mind around that and learning what they had done so that I could live in freedom. It prompted a gratefulness that I never knew existed within me. And it prompted a certain tenacity. Like there was when I studied their lives and what they had done, I just went, I don't need to be such a big complainer. I mean, if Lieutenant Compton can go, be in the snow of Bastogne, my life here right now is pretty good on a lot of levels. And so it just makes me more appreciative of the life I do have.
Yeah, that's very true. My grandpa was actually in World War II and has a story of how there was a bomb that got tossed at him. Everybody ducked for cover. There was no more place to go for cover, but luckily the bomb didn't explode. So I mean, my whole life I could have not existed if if that bomb went
Yeah,
off.
that's
Yeah,
right.
there's a lot of interesting stories out there. So to move to a little bit of a new topic, you talked a little bit about your collaboration and how you obviously did not meet until somewhat recently. So what
Mhm.
does the actual process look like, and how did it work between you two?
I think our process was actually very different than most co-authoring processes. And I know a lot of collaborative teams, a lot of teams that work together, Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child and Catherine Coulter and JT Ellison. And, there's a lot of teams that write together. And I think ours was different in several ways. And I've written also I did a trilogy with Ted Decker. So we did 3 books together, but even that was very different. In that case, our agents shook hands and we had a book deal and we jumped on the phone, and our agents and everybody, we all like flew down to Tennessee, and we started brainstorming from the ground up. But in this case, Marcus had a concept. And, one thing that appealed to me was, yeah, it's World War II. Readers love World War II. But you see so much in the European theater that you don't see as much about the Pacific. And, these kind of bigger stories. I mean, if you look back at my past work, my stories tend to be kind of heavier, bigger, conceptual stories. And so that really appealed to me. So I kind of came into a process that Marcus had already started.
Mhm.
But then also he was, like we talked about, he was willing to say, go, here's the playground as I built it right now. Go jump on all the stuff. And I just thought that was great. But I do think that's pretty different. I would say that the process is probably similar in the end when you've got edits that you're passing back and forth and you're saying, okay, or I just redid this chapter, take a look and mark it up, or whatever. Or even in the very, very end when you're getting edits from your publisher and you've been through this book so many times and you just don't want to look at it anymore, which there comes a point like that. And the wonderful thing about a co-author is you can say, you know what, you do this one. You take this past. Or, okay, here's the list of tweaks they want us to make. You do these and I'll do these, or yeah, I'll do the next one.
How's your
That's really a
schedule this
wonderful
coming
thing.
week? Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
I do a
nice.
lot of commercial collaborations, and yeah, as Tosca was mentioning there, the process of shaking hands is done pretty quickly, like usually with an hour on phone or Zoom. This one was different because because I had read Tosca's books. I read several of them beforehand, so it was much more of a methodical approach where I probably, yeah, I could have approached sort of any number of other writers, but I picked Tosca pretty carefully, going, oh yeah, I really, really like the way she writes. That would be cool to do a book together. Yeah.
Marcus says such nice things about me, so that's what makes this so fun.
She pays me later.
Of course. So another question about the writing. I mentioned that you had Philippa, a historical character. What made you choose her, and were there any other historical characters that you thought about adding?
Marcus chose her.
Yeah, there are any number of historical characters that sort of make a cameo here and there. General Wainwright comes by. I think, Patton and MacArthur make appearances at one point. But Philippa, there was just something so breathtakingly unique about this female guerrilla. Like it was something that a novelist could not create because it's so far-fetched. And yet we go, no, it actually happened. I mean, here
She's
we're
like an Amazon kind
yeah,
of.
women fighting for their country and fighting very effectively. And talk about equal representation and equal opportunity, and the women of the Philippines were getting it done.
Yeah, and she wasn't the only one. Historically, there were others also. But I think there's a line where one of the kids, maybe it was Jimmy in the book, says something like, I would not want to mess with a woman like this. And that's exactly who she was.
Oh, that sounds so amazing. Definitely going to have to read more about her.
Smoking her cigarettes, and then she's got a Thompson, what was that, a machine gun or something. Oh. She's not a woman you want to mess with.
No, not at all. All right, so as we wind up, my last question is going to be, what are you guys working on now? Are there any future collaborations in plan? Just whatever you want to finish up with.
Well, Marcus has a top secret project. he gets the top secret ones.
Well, that's fun.
Yeah, I'm actually forbidden on this. It's a commercial collaboration with an actor, and I have a non-disclosure agreement in place in the contract. But I can say that he does a lot of work with the USO, and he's a very big, strong proponent of the military. So it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. Nice.
I'm working on another historical. This one goes back a few hundred years. So this is a medieval thriller about the European witch hunts.
Oh, very interesting.
I hope so. We'll see.
Yeah, I look forward to both of those. So as we wind up here, I want to thank you both for joining us and discussing your experiences and writing, influences, just everything. Our additional library resource for tonight is, of course, The Long March Home. So we have this book available for our customers here in Hillsborough County. It's available through Libby. It's available through Hoopla. Hoopla you can download instantly. We also have actual physical copies you can also put on hold, though I think all of our copies are out right now, so you will have to put on hold and wait for it to pick up for a little bit. So put them on hold as soon as you can if you haven't read it yet. And if you do want to go ahead and contact our presenters, you can find them on their websites. So Marcus Brotherton is marcusbrotherton.com and Tosca Lee is toscalee.com. And to check out the book, it's thelongmarchhomebook.com. So you can view all of those. And if you're interested in upcoming library programs, you can go to hcplc.org/summer. It has all of our summer programs, including additional author talks. And if you need to reach the library, we're at hcplc.org/contact or by phone at 813-273-3652. But thank you again for sharing your stories tonight. I'm really glad you were able to make this program.
Great. Thanks so much, Becky.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Hope you have a good night.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.